down after such a wonderful delineation of what Afro-American theater looks like. But I operate in a world where my students are not Arab, mostly not students of color in general, and so I'll just kind of give you guys a brief synopsis of what it was like to teach Arab American theater at Pickens College in Fremont, California. I'll start the way most good stories start, which can McKim. In the spring of 2011, I taught a course entitled Arab American Literature After 9/11, and I actually really owe an apology to Barbara Nemri Aziz, which is in the audience. She warned me against titling the course that way, and I didn't listen, and I should have, because all the things that she said were going to happen did happen. I had students who skipped the first half of the course because it was designed to be a year-long two-part course, and only came to the second half with very clear expectations of what they wanted to see. I had actually designed it to debunk the students' ideas about what constitutes Arab American identity and to really disabuse them of the notion that the idea of what it means to be Arab American is fundamentally shaped by political crisis. The literature I had selected made the case pretty clearly that the figure of the Arab American is much different from Arab Americans. The former clearly in service of political and cultural aims, and the latter with an uneasy relationship to them. I was ill at ease to find that few of the students really allowed the literature to speak to them, and that many were loath to see the nuance and complication of the text themselves, preferring instead to map onto the writing their own anxieties, fears, and intellectual misadventures. So, what I offer today is a brief analysis of what happened when we worked with Betty Shamis, The Black-Eyed. I only included plays in the syllabus because Malik asked me to, and he's a good friend, and he was convincing that a dip outside my own comfort zone would be useful for them and for me. I also knew that it would be in the spring of my semester as a visiting professor at another place, and that inviting him to speak would give me at least 2 days off in teaching. So for those of you unfamiliar with the play, as a brief synopsis, it's 4 women characters in some kind of nebulous limbo space, waiting to go inside a door that promises no one knows what. And all of them have their own anxieties about the lives they've lived. You've got Delilah, the Delilah that we're not familiar with, Tamam, who's a crusade era figure, Aisha, who we don't find out until sort of the latter parts of the play that she sacrificed her life for political cause but now regrets it, and a character known only as the architect, who is particularly and profoundly interested in creating the architecture that surrounds her own life. Just a little bit of the scaffolding in class. We had 2 class sessions each week. In the first, I would compare really to the act of shampooing hair. And my lecture was really designed to kind of loosen the dirt of their minds and really strip them of all of the buildup that compromises their ability to allow the text to really be nourishing. So my lecture consisted of a warning about reading drama in an English class, because it's completely foreign medium to what it is an English class is supposed to do. And I warned that we had not really all read the same play, given that a play is meant to be staged. And the imaginative processes that we go through are a kind of mental gymnastics that attempt to compensate for not seeing the play on stage. So when we get to the theater, much of the work has already been done for us in terms of lighting, pacing, casting, staging, and the like. So their act of reading the play at home should really be considered kind of alternately liberatory in some ways, and then also just weird, because you're not seeing what's meant to be seen. I briefly discussed the preface to The Black-Eyed, in which she talks about being inspired by Tennessee Williams. And I asked them to consider that Southern literature tends to be ghettoized by similar logics and processes as Arab American literature. It's called provincial, it's called trivial, even though it seems to have a more instaunched place in the canon. When they went around the room to name Southern writers and could really only come up with Faulkner and Tennessee Williams, I reminded them
that their lack of familiarity also indicated a lack of exposure, which in turn makes an implicit statement about the processes of canonization and who's considered worthy of an AP English curriculum, which is all about the process of canonization. Throughout the class, I asked them to think about some of the other themes of the play, namely nihilism and solipsism through the vectors of gender and politics, which they had significant trouble doing. I tend to really allow an organic discussion in most of my classes, so the students really meander through two main ideas, and they were particularly concerned about the ending. Spoiler alert. The ending is the place where the architect goes into the room, and the other three are outside doing what is a chorus poem or a choreo poem, depending on how it's staged. Some of them were of the mindset that the play should be performed without the chorus poem. And others thought that the poem needed to be there because it provided an ending for the rest of the characters, and they were really unsatisfied with the idea that the architect was the only one who got any closure. What struck me, aside from their audacity in redoing the play, was that, I mean, every bone in my body as a lit critic was like, don't rewrite it, it's already written. Like, don't do that, don't do that. But what they were really interested in was whether they wanted the play to send a particular kind of message. And what they were really articulating was a kind of discomfiture with the idea that the play did not give them an easy sense of closure, whether it was good that the architect went into the room, whether the room itself was promising, what was in this mysterious room. They were very uncomfortable with all the questions that the real ending of the play left unsettled. My audacity, my irritation about their audacity was pretty apparent, actually, and I said to them, you know, we never rewrite Beckett. Apparently, it's because Beckett doesn't allow us to rewrite Beckett. His estate has some, finicky issues about that. But we also don't rewrite Miller and other playwrights and dramatists. But they were very comfortable saying this was bad and this was good. And I reminded them that there's a kind of politics inherent in that. But they were also just kind of, their unwillingness to accept a note of ambiguity really bothered me. The characters were either actors or victims, unfathomable or relatable. It was really uneasy dichotomies. And I would venture this is due in part to the fact that this was the third week in the semester. They hadn't had a chance to really get used to me yet and to begin to, I guess, give me the answers I wanted, or at least stumble upon them in some meaningful way. Not that that's what I want them to do, but then it's a lot easier when they are at least rehearsing what it is you want them to say. But I would also venture that it could be attributed to the ideas that they had about Arab American identity at the beginning of the class. They were convinced that it was always an interplay between two polar opposites, rather than understand, to paraphrase Saad McWilliams, that they are already implicated in their own interpretations of the text. That whatever they were seeing, in some ways, was about what they wanted to see, rather than what was actually there. They needed to, quote, they tended to, quote, exoticize the text, reducing the complexity of the foreign culture, quote unquote, to a symbol of tantalizing inscrutability, or domesticate the text, reading it narcissistically to discover attitudes and values that resembled their own. And as a result, they were skeptical of the ideas elsewhere in the text, the recuperation of narrative, for instance, with Delilah's character, the erasure of silence about a period of time that we don't actually understand from the perspective of the Arab world, or the humanization of Aisha's character. They were really loath to really engage with those kinds of complex questions. What does it mean if you're looking at the afterlife of a suicide bomber and there's regret? What does it mean if you're looking at Delilah and Samson's story from Delilah's point of view? What about coercion? What about solicitude? What about narcissism? What about all these things that we don't actually attribute to female characters because it's too bad or not important enough to talk about? They were very unwilling to wrestle with that, but they stayed pretty much in the realm of this person is good, this person is bad, and never the two shall meet. So in writing this paper for today, I thought that part of the difficulty in teaching this text lay in part with my own kind of pedagogical limitations because I was fresh out of grad school, and I think that was part of the difficulty. I think my own frustration with the class was a frustration with myself, and the fact that I hadn't followed Barbara's advice. She gives good advice, clearly. But part of the difficulty in teaching the text lays in the text itself, in its readiness to be engaged with in particular ways in an English class. There's something misleading about the fourth wall and the frame of the stage when it has to be imagined rather than when it's there for you. The imaginative stage appears more neat, more concrete than the real theater ever is. Real theater never lets you forget that what you're seeing is produced and heavily mediated. You are also completely subject to the whims of the audience around you. If they're laughing, even if you're not laughing, you still have to engage with the fact that they found it funny. Under the harsh fluorescent light of a dorm or a classroom, one can forget that a play, even on the page, is deliberate and full of vital organs, and I think that the skeletal format belies its rich density. So the question for me at this point in teaching teaching Arab American drama is how to do it, and how to do it in such a way that students are still able to engage with the complexity of the theater while also being able to be exposed to drama in an English class. Because I don't think it's appropriate to shunt it aside because I don't teach drama, or because I'm not in a performance department. But the question remains is kind of how to do it. There's something about the particular cosmology of Los Angeles that made Pitzer's class particularly unique, and now that I'm in Maine, it's a bit different. But what I will say is that there's something that has to happen in an English class when you're doing drama that allows the students to access the play without attempting to become the characters and enact something that doesn't actually belong to them, and something that allows them to access the importance of deliberate decisions in drama that requires a kind of nuance that simply wasn't there in my classes, but also that requires them to really sift through their own audacity, their own intellectual misdeeds, their own crap that they bring to the text in a way that the theater allows you to do, particularly because you're forced to engage with it collectively, but you're also forced to see it performed and see someone else's imagination take shape before you. So I guess what I'm leaving for you is kind of an open question of how to teach theater in the classroom and how to teach theater in general when what you really want to do is allow for it to be a transformative experience. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Excellent. Next, Dr.